So folks, we're back with another Titans card review. We've got day one of the neutral card reveals, including this new legendary, which I think might be depicting a horrifying act. I think this behemoth here is about to run over that cute little light bulb guy, but there's other ones riding it, so maybe he's just leading the charge instead of being crushed to death. I don't know. Either way, this is a 6-mana 4/5 mech. With Battlecry, you get 2 random magnetic mechs. They cost 2 less. So keep in mind, we got magnetic returning as a keyword in this expansion. We've got some magnetic cards already in the core set as well, with stuff like Ziliax. We're going to take a look at a new magnetic card later in this review. So this is a pool that is going to expand certainly a little bit and already has access to some stuff. Now, listen, this card is, generating you some nice value, and it's coming with a discount, which can help. We've seen other cards like this in the past. I'm actually reminded of let's say Nelly for Warrior, the Colossal. If you want to take a look here real quick at Nelly, the Great Thresher, right? This is a 7-drop. That gets you a couple cards, and they are discounted, of course, right? We know that the pirate chip costs 2 less. So very similar space, but when I look at this compared to that, my God, does this seem so much worse. For only 1 more mana, Nelly gets you 2 bodies. You get to discover the cards that you're getting as well. So you get way better choices, and you get 3 of them instead of just 2. So this is losing a lot of upside for only 1 mana, and I just don't see how this card keeps up in modern day Hearthstone. Yes, of course, you can sometimes get stuff that you can play right away attaching to this, getting 0 mana magnetic cards, but then you're just kind of playing probably a big kind of dumb minion that's not good, or a couple small minions next to it. It's not going to be a great board development in that case. And then if you get higher cost mechs, those are probably going to be things you're saving for later because they may be too expensive to magnetize immediately. So then you're just playing a 4/5 on turn 6. You're just playing a Yeti and then hoping that these mechs swing things back hard enough in the future. I don't see how that's ever going to happen. There's no consistency here because of random magnetic cards. So it's not like you're going to get crazy good things all the time. Yeah, an occasional Ziliax, but is that going to be too late in the game to pull things back? Because if you're playing this in a more aggressive tempo-based mech deck, you're probably going to be in trouble if you lose the board. Typically, those decks really want to maintain board advantage, and then trying to get it back after playing a Flame Behemoth, that doesn't seem very likely to me. So I don't know. Mech decks in general, we've kind of got Mech Mage and Mech Paladin stuff. Hunter historically has had some mech options too. I don't really see how this fits into any of those. I do think this card existing as another card to randomly generate, so things like Mech Mage making one of these, and then using this on turn 8 out of desperation for one last final wave or push in their deck. That's a possibility. That's a use case for this card. But as far as running it in your decks, this just looks way too slow and way too inconsistent to me. It is really bad when you compare it to its peers and cards that do similar sorts of things. So I just don't see this getting there. Even if mech decks succeed, I don't think this card will be a piece of that. I think they'll be faster or have more distinct, consistent game plans. Whereas this is just kind of a pile of bad stuff that costs probably too much. So next up here, we have another mech, and I'm a little more hopeful for this one. This is the Mecha Leaper, a 3-mana 2/2 mech and beast. And you might see a version floating around with just mech, but this is confirmed to be mech and beast. He's magnetic, and Death Rattle give a friendly mech +2/+2 and this Death Rattle. So this card's doing things I expect mech decks to be more excited about, right? It's playing for stats and board and aggression in the early to mid game, which is historically where mech decks have succeeded most. So plop this down on one of your early game cards, you get those immediate stats. Maybe you're just pushing some extra damage face, maybe you're taking a nice little value trade thanks to these stats, as magnetic cards have always been enabling us to do. And then you've got this kind of this hedge against removal, where if the opponent wants to deal with this card, maybe that 2/2 floats over to another card, and you get to keep this value chain rolling if they can't quite keep up with all of your various small mechs on board. You can even control that yourself, where you got a 1/1 left over, the opponent's got a 3/3 on board, and you play this, you trade it in, you're happy to bounce this Death Rattle over to another mech on board. Now that said, you're not always going to have other mechs on board if you don't get out ahead and start snowballing to an advantage, a card like this can be pretty awkward to play from behind, because number one, you might not get to take that clean trade where you know it's going to go ahead and roll off once. And then other times, if you just kind of throw it out there, your opponent can dictate the order of things that are killed, and then maybe leave this for last and thereby kill its death rattle. So it is definitely a little bit conditional and does feel a little bit like a card that requires you to have gotten a good start, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes having cards that help you cement victories, and you know, they're called win more cards in some cases, but that can be a good thing. You want to win more, you want to secure your wins and shore up your advantages in many cases. So then it's just a question about how consistently that's happening, what kind of meta we're in, whether there's cheap enough removal, small things that are trading into. It's one of those cards that probably comes in and out a little bit of favor, and that's even if a mech deck succeeds. So I would say some niche utility here, a card that I expect to see every once in a while, but maybe not a super consistent piece of a mech package, just depending on counters that exist, early removal, so on and so forth, where this kind of slots into what the rest of the decks in the meta are doing at a given time. But definitely some potential. I think more appealing card than our last one for sure. All right, so moving on here, we've got the Eventomatics Magnetize Synergy, a 2-mana 2/3 mech. Whenever you magnetize a minion, give it +1/+1. So if you got all this magnetic stuff rolling around, this can be a way to increase those stats with a little bit of a mana overhead. This card does have some snowball ability of its own, I would say, too, because if you can get this down and then start magnetizing it, then it's going to scale itself with that additional +1/+1, and it might get harder and harder for the opponent to keep up with and remove this thing, especially if their deck that doesn't have any kind of hard removal, which then of course lets you benefit more and more from this magnetic buff over multiple turns. So it just kind of hits a critical mass of all these extra stats on board. So this could be one of those cards that's very make or break. Like if it survives and sticks and starts scaling, you run away with the game. If it doesn't, then you lose. And it's in a really interesting spot for that. It's 2-mana 2/3, so very susceptible to death if you plop it down on turn 2. But then if you wait until, like, say, turn 4 or 5 and try to magnetize it simultaneously, then you're talking about the scaling maybe coming online too late. So it's one of those cards you kind of feel like you have to get down early enough to make it worth it and to make it a payoff, but it might just be too susceptible at that stage. So, you know, again, maybe a little bit meta dependent, how much early game removal, how many early threats are on board that can trade in and kill this thing easily. Is there going to be some really cheap magnetic card where you can get this down early and start building on its health and survivability? That's what I think Inventomatic is going to need to succeed. Otherwise, this might just come on too late, because I don't think you want to be on like turn 5 or 6 and then just play this alongside another magnetic card for a measly extra +1/+1 and just a 2/3 on board. That doesn't really feel worth it to me. I think it needs to come down early and really build on itself, or really add a lot of stats, maybe 2/2, 3/3, 4/4, for it to really feel worth it in many cases. So a card, again, that's a little bit susceptible to metas and may not be exactly the right shape or like order of plays that mechs are looking for. They might just need to get down stickier and harder, a little bit faster here than the Inventomatic, which is more about like setup and building for later as opposed to building for now. That makes me a tad bit nervous for this one. So next up here, we have the Containment Unit. This is cool. A big old mech holding back Faceless there. 7-mana 6/6 mech with Magnetic and Death Rattle. Summon a random 8-cost minion. So actually quite a bit of stats piled into this one. The average 8-drop, you know, it's going to be pretty big. There's some good effects in there too. Some low rolls as well that aren't going to feel particularly great. But all in all, a couple pretty big bodies on this card. You've also here got, you know, just 6/6 magnetic can be a big push for stats, just hit people in the face, build up on a really big board. So could this squeeze into the top end of a mech deck? I think it comes online just maybe a little bit late for that, but this is another one of those cards where, my God, when you randomly generate this and you didn't have much else to do, it's going to feel pretty good in those instances. It's going to push a lot of power and a lot of threat and kind of be that last big wave probably the opponent might have trouble dealing with. It's like, oh God, I dealt with this giant thing they made, but now this 8-drop left behind. I can't quite deal with that. I guess in that case, there is definitely some potential there. I don't know how much this runs into builds, but for builds that are randomly generating mechs otherwise, maybe a possibility. Do keep in mind, you know, we already took a look at, you know, our Flame Behemoth. Like, this is a card that will be in the Flame Behemoth pool. But again, I don't actually think it's a great one. Like Flame Behemoth, you're still just playing a Yeti on 6. It's like, okay, yeah, I got a 5-drop containment unit. That's a great card. A 5-drop containment unit is insane. But if you sacrifice too much to get there, not a card you're playing right away. It's just delayed a turn. It's on the defensive instead of on the aggressive end. It's not attacking immediately with those stats usually. So I don't think this helps fix any Flame Behemoth problems, but it's an intriguing card nonetheless. Moving on to the XB488 Disposal Bot. This is a 5-mana 3/2 mech. It's a Forge card, and it has a battle cry. Deal 5 damage randomly split among all enemy minions. So a little bit of a removal type card here. Clean up your opponent's board, and if you forge this, then you're going to give it life steal as well. So it's a bit of a board cleanup that can also heal you for 5. So that's a 7-mana commitment. Remember, it costs 2 mana to forge something, which I think leaves this card in a really bad spot. I think by the time you get to 5 mana, 5 damage on board's really not that good. It's gonna like stagger across multiple things and not actually kill anything or clean anything up. It might get like 1/1/1, but then, you know, it might leave like a 4/2 behind that was originally a 4/4 sort of thing. So it's gonna feel really bad in those instances. And from a healing output standpoint, that's not a very efficient healing card either. So it's kind of bad at both instead of good at both. When we look at dedicated healing cards, we've got way better options. When we look at this kind of pingy removal cards, we've got way better options as well. So I think this is going to get left in the dust so fast. You really aren't going to want to play this one much at all in control decks. Certainly doesn't seem to make sense in more aggressive mech decks. So for me, this card just looks really weak. Moving on here to the Mechanome Guide, another Forge card. He is a 4-cost 3/4 mech. Battlecry, discover a spell, and Forge, it costs 3 less. So you can invest 2 mana ahead of time on your Mechanome Guide, make that spell cost 3 less. That's netting you 1 total mana over the course of the game, which kind of makes Mechanome Guide feel like a 3-cost card in a weird way. But of course, also discounting things can have advantages because you can weave them together with other plays simultaneously, doing things like finding burst damage, cheating out a big spell earlier than you'd otherwise be able to, and so on. So this is an interesting card. We've seen a lot of these Discover a Thing cards work really well in a lot of value decks, late game decks in Hearthstone, things like Death Knights and Priests and so on. Find ways to make cards like this work. And a lot of times I think decks like that are floating 2 mana sometimes early. It's like, I don't really have much else to do. Let's just take this time to forge the Mechanome Guide, invest this 2 mana now, so that when I play this on 4, not only am I getting a body down, but maybe I'm getting a cheap removal spell that I can weave in immediately. Maybe I'm getting an 8 mana spell that I discount to 5 and I can play on turn 5 right away. And that's going to create some big, awesome swings. So in that regard, I actually think the Mechanome Guide looks pretty cool. Certain classes, particularly that have great discover pools, will probably benefit from this one a lot. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if this shows up in some of those greedier, more value-based decks as yet another discover option. Moving on to the Melted Maker. This is a Forge synergy card of sorts. He is a 3-mana 3/3 elemental, and he reads, after you forge a card, get a copy of it. So that's interesting because you'll get the copy of the upgraded thing. So for instance, here you would get the Mechanome Guide that is forged, discover a spell, it costs 3 less. And obviously, you know, that's kind of like getting a 2 mana bonus when you actually do forge. So you could have something like a 5 mana play where you play Melted Maker, you forge your Mechanome Guide, and then you'll end up with 2 forged Mechanome Guides, which, you know, that's definitely some value. There could be specific forge cards that are so powerful that this is worth it. I definitely don't think most decks are going to be willing to pay the 3 mana overhead on this one for an average forge card. Like, I don't really think it's worth it for the Mechanome Guide to get a second Mechanome Guide. Like, you're just running too many cards, too many moving pieces, and too much mana commitment to really do that. So I think it would have to be something specific where it's like forging this sets up some crazy combo, and if I have 2 of these forged cards, I can kill people or do some broken crazy sort of thing, because otherwise this card is just an extra slot in your deck, an extra thing to draw that's got this conditionality, and it doesn't really feel that useful in that case. So I would say very, very niche, very specific potential utility here, which is unlikely to be extracted. Moving on here to the Watcher of the Sun. This is a 2-mana 2/3 with Battlecry. Get a random holy spell, and Forge also restore 6 health to your hero. So actually really high healing output here for a 2-drop minion. It's kind of a 4-drop if you're spending 2 to forge it, so keep that in mind. but could still be some big in a pinch healing late. Sometimes with Priest in particular, you know, it's annoying because it's like, oh, I can hero power on 2 and I can heal, but I'm at full health still. I need this healing later. So this could do something like allow you to invest 2 mana now on turn 2 if you forge this when you're full health, and then kind of bank that healing for later, so that you can invest now and still get the upside later on for the same 2 mana while getting the Watcher of the Sun. But he has this nice base utility too of getting a random holy spell, which I think is actually pretty nice. I think obviously in a class like Priest, they have a lot of good holy spells they like. It's not just going to be limited to Priest spells, but you know, it's a good fit. And then actually in Mage, we've seen Rainbow Mage teased as an archetype where they're looking for different spell schools. This could be a way to get a playable early game holy spells. You don't have to rely on like Sunwell or whatever to fill the holy slot. So definitely a card we could see in a Rainbow Mage as well. I don't know that the healing fits the game plan of Rainbow Mage quite as well, but interesting nonetheless. So I actually think this card looks pretty cool. It's a nice little value card with this life gain upside, which again, greedy decks, value decks should value both of these things pretty highly, I would think. Moving on here to the Sharp-Eyed Seeker. This is a 3 mana 3/3 beast with Battle Cry. If there is a card in your deck that didn't start there, draw it, which is pretty cool. That is a really, really specific sort of tutor, which I think for me, the first thing that comes to mind is Photographer Fizzle. Shuffling in Fizzle's Snapshot. You could use this to immediately draw your Fizzle Snapshot if that is the only thing in your deck, assuming you're not in a format where some bombs have gotten shuffled in. That actually might be really, really powerful. Basically, this kind of becomes a like draw a card that now draws you like 5 cards or whatever instead of just 1, because you get that Fizzles, which is often going to be in a full of additional cards. So this could be kind of a 1-2 punch card draw engine for decks that are otherwise happy to run Photographer Fizzle. This is maybe a little bit weaker because you can't play it on curve. You got to wait on the Fizzle, so there's definitely some risk there, but maybe a deck's got a couple cards that they're happy to shuffle in, or other powerful things they're just happy to shuffle in anyway. So yeah, I don't know, man. This card's fetching something so specific that it feels like some deck's going to figure out a way to use that, right? And it's not too pricey at 3 mana for that sort of effect for a card draw card. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if this pops into some decks here and there. It's not an everyday sort of card. Not everybody's going to value this, of course, but definitely a very, very powerful effect in the right scenario. So next up here, we've got the Careless Mechanist. Mechanist? I don't know how to say that. 3 mana 4/5. After you draw your second card in a turn, destroy this. So obviously a card you want to play down here for some big stats and a more aggressive deck, and then you're just hoping not to draw multiple cards so this guy can stick around and be that big aggressive threat. We've seen a few cards in this model before, like big stats with downside in the early game. They usually don't get there, and I don't even think this is the most aggressive, biggest version of this sort of card either. We've seen things pushed even harder here than the Careless Mechanist. The Careless Mech is what he'll be called from here on out. So I don't really see this one getting there, man. There's other options and other things that just do this bigger and faster, create more pressure for the same sort of cost. So this one seems to fall short. And then finally here we have the Time Lost Proto Drake. Somebody's out there hunting for this card. It's impossible to find, but as a common card, that seems a little ill-fitted for the Time Lost Proto Drake. If you don't know what I'm talking about, this is a hard to get mount in World of Warcraft. People have to like camp out for it for ever, basically. It is a 4 mana 4/5 dragon with taunt, and it reads, when you draw this, add a random dragon to your hand. So a little bit of free resource generation here off the Time Lost Proto Drake, but not much of a body to go with it. You're not excited to play a 4/5 taunt in Hearthstone these days. So I don't know. I don't feel good about this one. Like, yeah, there's some stuff like, Menagerie Warrior who might need more dragons and might want to fill their hand and might even have some taunt synergies to go with it. So I wouldn't write it off totally. That's a tiny, tiny little slice for this card to maybe grab onto, but I still think it seems unlikely. That deck has more powerful plays, more consistent options than this. So even there, a deck that it seems perfect and tailor-made for doesn't seem like it fits that well, which means I think very often, probably not a great card. So next up here, we have Razor Scale, a new 3 mana 2/4 epic dragon who reads, cards can't cost less than 2. I think some people wish this were a rule in Hearthstone in general, with all of the various card spam, zero mana card spam stuff we've seen throughout Hearthstone's lifespan. I know some people want that version of Hearthstone. Maybe that'll be a twist format someday. So, you know, theoretically here you could use Razor Scale as kind of a tech card against those kind of card spam decks, where if they're looking to cycle through a bunch of stuff or have some kind of blow up turn, you can slam down a Razor Scale and hope to disrupt that. But notably, this is text on a card. It's not a rest of game effect, so he has to be there, which means, of course, as soon as your opponent uses a 2-mana spell to remove this guy, then they can just go on their merry way and probably don't feel all that disrupted. So listen, you know, this is fun in theory. I love the idea of slowing down these kinds of decks, but this is just not the card to do that. Worst case scenario, they just kind of wait a turn while killing this and then do their thing next turn, right? It's not that bad for them. It's not that hard for them to play around and work around an effect like this one. And certainly, like, playing this on turn 3 is some kind of tempo play, like shut down, you know, your opponent's 3/1 drops on turn 3. You know, number one, that sounds not that great, but it still doesn't make sense. The stats are just too weak on this to squeeze it in. So I think this is one of those tech cards. It's kind of cool. It's fun for people to think that things like this are important, but will ultimately be very difficult to run and impossible to find a moment where this actually feels good. Like playing this into your opponent's combo turn, there are better ways to disrupt. We've already seen a few cards in this set that have, I think, more notable disruption than this one. So for me, Razor Scale just doesn't look like it gets there pretty much ever. Flame Behemoth is a 2-star card. Mecha Leaper is a 3-star card. Invento-Matic is a 3-star card. Containment Unit is a 3-star card. XB488 Disposal Bot is a 1-star card. Mechanome Guide is a 4-star card. Melted Maker is a 2-star card. Watcher of the Sun is a 4-star card. Sharp-Eyed Seeker is a 4-star card. Careless Mechanist is a 1-star card. Time Lost Proto-Drake is a 1-star card. Razor Scale is a 1-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this Titans review. We got more neutral cards tomorrow, including, I think, the final neutral legendary. So stay tuned for that. Share your thoughts in these comments, or on these cards, in the comments below. Thanks so much, as always, for watching. And until next time, game on.